Tonight I stand on behalf of the Yeshiva Centre management. Before I make any formal introductions, I wanted to quickly set out some of the reasons Yeshiva Centre decided to host this evening tonight. We all appreciate that we stand in the wake of a Royal Commission, and as an institution, the Yeshiva Centre recognised that it was ill-equipped to deal with its response at the time of the abuse. And we've acknowledged that we didn't do enough. We've been open as a centre about the steps we've taken over the past years to strengthen protection across all our campuses, and just this week we've announced varying levels of redress to past victims. So now what? In recent times I've been asked more than once or twice, haven't we heard enough? Haven't we done enough? Aren't we now ready to close that chapter and move forward? But dealing with the past only takes us so far. Tonight's about gaining some insight into their ongoing story. It's about trying to learn from some subject matter experts and from victims themselves. Theirs is a story that doesn't simply end because we've made a formal decision that we'd like to move on. So before I call on Rabbi Glick to make some introductory reflections, I wish to reiterate the message that I shared with victims on Monday morning. You were each entrusted to the care of the Yeshiva Centre. All of you were blameless. All of you were just children. Each and every one of you had the right to be protected and cared for. You had a right to feel safe. You had a right to be educated in an environment that enabled you to reach your full potential. In each of these respects, we let you down in ways that we can never fully make up for. For the abuse you suffered while you were in our care, on behalf of myself personally, and the Yeshiva Centre management and staff, past and present, I am profoundly sorry. But tonight, I want to add to that message. You continue to have those rights, to feel safe, accepted, and supported. Tonight, the Yeshiva Centre pledges 100% to show you the ongoing empathy, compassion, care, and support you rightfully deserve. As individuals, as community members, and as part of Klal Yisrael. Rabbi Glick.
I'd like to, first of all, thank the organisers of this, I consider a Hakel event, for giving me the opportunity to speak this evening, even though I'm not part of the panel. My words this evening are my own. I do not speak on behalf of anyone else, but I sincerely hope that everyone will embrace my words in the spirit that they are intended. I also believe that were Rabbi Groner, Olav Shalom, to be alive today, he would agree wholeheartedly with the sentiments that I'm about to express. So first of all, a little background to the reason for my participation tonight. At the Royal Commission into Sexual Abuse of Children, historical child sexual abuse at Yeshiva, I committed to reaching out to victims and doing everything possible to help them in the journey forward. Since then, I have made contact with many of the victims, and in some instances, I've actually met with them personally, face to face, or at least spoken to them over the telephone. Approximately 5.5 months ago, at a meeting in my home between Manny and myself, we agreed in principle that it would be in everybody's interest to find a way for everyone to work together harmoniously to ensure that children are better protected from abuse and to support those who are sadly and unfortunately the victims of abuse. This evening, we are taking a significant step along the road to achieving those goals. By Hashgacha Pratis, that means divine providence, this gathering takes place during the Yom Tov, the festival of Hanukkah, and I would like to apply two aspects of Hanukkah to tonight's event. First, The word Hanukkah means, or can mean, chinuch, education. Second, the word Hanukkah actually means chanu koi, two Hebrew words which mean that they rested and they were at peace on the 15th of Kislev. 25th of Kislev. Whilst Hanukkah commemorates the victory of the Maccabean over the Greek Assyrians, the name Hanukkah itself refers to the beginning of tranquil, peaceful times that followed. So the first aspect, Hanukkah as chinuch and education, I wish to openly acknowledge and apologize for the mistakes and the failings of the past. I realize and I regret that in the past, the true impact of child abuse and the pain and the suffering that abuse causes to victims, to their families, to their parents, these were not yet fully understood. I'm sincerely sorry and I apologize for that pain and suffering. Given that much of the abuse occurred whilst I was principal of Yeshiva College, I've seen fit to resign from my positions of leadership in the Yeshiva Centre. Tonight, I appeal to everyone to do everything possible to make this Hanukkah a turning point and a new chapter in the way we address the issues of child sexual abuse. Now, I'm not suggesting that we should forget the past. I'm not suggesting that we should try to excuse past mistakes and failures. Rather, in the spirit of Hanukkah, of chinuch, we must learn from the mistakes of the past and make sure that they are never repeated. The second aspect of Hanukkah, chonu chafhei, that they rested and they were at peace. Hopefully, this new, positive, collective approach of reconciliation with an ongoing commitment to Ahavas Yisrael will unite us as a community and thereby making us stronger. It will also bring peace of mind and peace of heart to those who have endured pain and suffering and help them to progress along the path to recovery, healing, and true lasting happiness. One more point. Hanukkah is a festival of light. And I want to take this opportunity to commend all of those who, as advocates for victims, have shed light on the issue of child sexual abuse and through their advocacy have brought it into focus. I also wish to commend the victims for their courage in speaking out publicly tonight about their experiences. We are all working for the same cause, towards the same goals. And as such, we must do everything possible to work as a team. Team, T-E-A-M. Together, everyone achieves more. So, that with a team approach and supporting each other, the real beneficiaries will be our children, who in the future will be much safer, and past victims, who will be able to move forward towards a better, brighter, and happier future. Hanukkah commemorates the miracles associated with the Menorah in the Beis Hamikdash, and may we all merit to witness the lighting of the Menorah in the third Beis Hamikdash with the coming of Mashiach B'Karav Mamash. A freilichen, happy Hanukkah.
Good evening, everyone. I won't take up much of your time. We have a packed program tonight and we want to hear from as many people and as much as possible, and as much as anything it's about you having a voice and a discussion, and this is very much the beginning of the conversation. It's not the end of the conversation. It's the start of our community moving forward. Just some housekeeping issues. The way we're going to run the evening tonight is we've got our three panel speakers, Dr. Cathy, Kezelman, Rabbi YY Jacobson, who will be via video, and of course Manny Wax. We will then hear from some other victims as well, and then we will have a short break to light Hanukkah licht, after which we will have the panel. Throughout the evening there will be opportunities for questions, particularly during the panel session. We have a mobile number if you want to take it down. Apparently the other one's not working. It's 0412 565 603. 0412 565 603. We won't have questions during the speeches, but if you have them, hold them or text them, and we'll try and get to as many as possible throughout the evening, because, as I said, it's all about dialogue. In that, I'd ask everyone to please, we want to hear, we want to ask, we want to talk, we want to shed light, as Ted Bailey said downstairs 2 weeks ago. We want to bring light so that this discussion can happen, so that it's no longer shameful and it's no longer in the dark. But with that, I ask that people be respectful of each other, as Rabbi Glick said, that we act as a team together. There are survivors and there are families of survivors, some who we know, some who we don't know in this room, and I really ask that people be careful and sensitive about the questions or the way they pose those questions. I hope not to have to do much moderating at all or intervening, but if questions do get personal and questions go off topic about things that are not the subject of this evening, I will step in. Without any further ado, I would like to introduce Dr. Cathy Kezelman, AM. Dr. Kezelman is a medical practitioner. She's the founder of the national organisation Adults Surviving Child Abuse. She's a member of the Mental Health Community Advisory Council, member of the New South Wales Jewish Board of Deputies, Child Protection Task Force, and on the advisory panel of Tzedek. So she is a formidable person and particularly apt to speaking tonight, as well as being a survivor of child sexual abuse. She's a prominent voice in the media and at conferences, and it goes on and on and on. I think she's suitably qualified to be educating us all tonight. Thank you.
Thanks for having me. Just waiting for my... Yeah, so I'm here obviously to talk about what it's like to be abused, and the reason I talk about that is my own abuse. Just tell you a little bit about myself. I was working away as a GP, and in my mid-40s I had a breakdown. I didn't know what on earth was happening to me. And my world completely fell apart. I had panic attacks, I spent 2 years in bed, and I was acutely suicidal. Had I not had someone who believed me and was there for me unconditionally, I wouldn't be here to tell this story. My 4 children would not have a mother, so that's why I'm so passionate about what I do. Technical problems. So the next slide is the elephant in the room, and what's good about this event is that the elephant is being spoken about, because for a long time I used to quip that talking about abuse was the best way to clear a room, and obviously it makes everyone uncomfortable, but it makes no one more uncomfortable than the people who've experienced it. So the Royal Commission, obviously that's part of the catalyst for what's happening here today. And the Royal Commission is more than halfway through its term. It's going to continue to the end of 2017. And the Royal Commission has heard testimony from thousands and thousands of survivors. And in the redress scheme that's proposed to government, they're expecting 60,000 survivors to come forward and claim redress. It's looking, obviously, at systemic issues across institutions. I suppose the most important message that I want to give about the Royal Commission, it's not about one community or another. It's not about apportioning blame. It's about all working together to look at what is, unfortunately, a very pervasive social practice and seeing how we can create change. Obviously, institutional child sexual abuse is the focus of the Commission, but sadly also sexual abuse occurs far more commonly in the home, family and the neighbourhood. And hopefully soon we'll be able to start really talking about that as well, because that's still very much an elephant in the room. So sexual abuse, it's a crime. to start there. It's common. Sadly, it happens to children during their very crucial developmental years. And just imagine what it's like for a child of 2, 4, 6 who is having things done to them that they don't even have words for, that they don't understand. It often goes on for a long period of time. It's often extreme. And it's often perpetrated by the very people who are meant to care and protect the child. Child sexual abuse affects the developing brain. It happens during developmental years. It's not about personal weakness. It's about what actually changes to the way the brain is structured, the way neurons form pathways. It has a physiological basis, and the impact on survivors, therefore, is not, as I say, about their failures. It's perfectly understandable in the context of trauma. It makes total sense. We know about grooming behaviours, and we all need to be very aware that children who are isolated, children who appear vulnerable for some particular reason, be very susceptible to being made to feel special, to having special treats. And the consequences of that are, again, confusion. The child's special, but the child's being hurt and harmed in that special relationship. And when the child then goes to seek help and is not believed, and we know that a very, very small percentage of people, of children, make this up, very, very small. What that does when someone has the courage to come forward is actually make them less likely to trust, because what sexual abuse is a very primary betrayal of trust. It's an abuse of power and a betrayal of trust. So coming forward, disclosing, but not being believed, is probably the worst thing that you can do to a survivor. It causes enormous harm and it re-traumatises people. And we've seen, sadly, a lot of betrayal within all sorts of systems of care, institutions, families as well. So this is a quote about trauma. Judith Herman is one of the doyens of trauma and wrote a book called Trauma and Recovery back in 1992, but still one of the most substantial impact statements about what trauma does and what this sort of trauma does, child sexual abuse. It impacts the very development of a sense of self, the very core issues of what it is to be human. And when one can't know about oneself, when one's self-esteem is so impacted, you can't have a relationship with yourself, you can't have a healthy relationship with others and a healthy relationship with the world. And you come to believe that the world is harmful, the world is a dangerous place, and that's just a terrible way to have to go through life. So how can survivors present, and obviously we don't have much time, sadly, in many, many ways. And certainly I know myself that, I may have been a doctor and, that gave me an identity. But as a human being, I had no sense of self at all. I was terrified to speak in private, let alone in public. Survivors often have, those physiological responses we spoke about can be very hyper-aroused, hyper-alert, waiting for the next harm to come, living in fear, or very shut down, very closed off, very numb. And survivors use various ways to cope, and we need to understand that people who've survived abuse are resilient, they're still here, and we need to honour that strength. But some of the coping strategies people use, alcohol, substance abuse, smoking, overeating, self-harm, of course, are not so constructive, but it's about working with people to understand why people are coping in those ways and to work with people to find more constructive ways of being. So what does abuse cause? It causes all sorts of reactivity. People often hypersensitive, almost allergic to stress, because one has a heightened stress response that really doesn't go back to ground level. All sorts of physical and mental health repercussions, challenges in daily functioning, just going through the world, things that other people take for granted. Just got a few graphs here just to demonstrate this. Might need to click that again. No, it's not working. Okay. This is the graph which comes from a very pivotal study called the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study, and it looks at the different forms of childhood trauma, neglect, abuse, growing up in domestic violence. And it shows the relationship between the numbers of those sorts of trauma and depression. Next one. Suicide. Next one. Alcoholism. And there are graphs for this around liver disease, heart disease, lack of work productivity. I mean, there are endless graphs that show the impact of childhood trauma. And we know that child sexual abuse is rarely, if ever, the only trauma. In fact, I believe you can't be sexually abused and not be emotionally abused. I mean, it just isn't possible. So acknowledging trauma, the most critical thing, and we run a 1300 line in our service, and we have people ringing up that service in the 80s and 90s telling people for the very first time. And they tell us just what it feels like to actually have someone listen to them, to feel that they're heard, to have someone understand and to be believed. And we can't overstress how absolutely critical that is. And how important it is, and certainly with the Royal Commission, what's been important is that people in a position of power have shown that what happened to someone mattered, and that what happened to someone is actually going to make a difference for others, that it will create a better world for children so that children in the future will be safer. We know that sadly, when people have tried to disclose their abuse, it's been often treated by silence in a whole range of communities. We're not here to apportion blame or to point fingers. This is about trying to understand why we protect ourselves in certain ways and why communities respond in certain ways as well. Because, it's too hard to hear. We don't want to know about it happening, so we'd rather push it away. But what that means for a survivor who, imagine a child who's being abused, they're isolated, they're alone, they don't have anyone to go to. It puts them back into that childhood space of being alone. And no one can live in isolation, and you certainly can't recover from abuse in isolation. So the core issue here, we're talking about disconnection from others, and recovery is all about reclaiming that connection and reclaiming connection to communities and to families and to communities that are really important. And that obviously includes spiritual communities that hold so much store for various people. So it's very hard, obviously, to be hearing stories of abuse and trauma. And I was speaking we had Justice McClellan speak at an event I was involved with the other week, and talked about how the commissioners able to sit there day in, day out, listen to the worst things that human beings do to one another. And obviously he said this is not been easy. He himself is not able to watch the television, what went on in Paris. He's had enough of the trauma. But I mean, they're doing amazing, compassionate work. But what we also need to remember is to hold the hope for survivors, because survivors have often lost a sense of hope. And to know that people have survived and to hold on to that sense of strength and resilience and to watch the process of recovery. And I suppose, I'm here to say that it is possible to recover from this. I was very lucky. I had the capacity to afford a lot of very good therapy. I had a therapist who was able to be there unconditionally for me for years. Unfortunately, a lot of people don't have that capacity. So very good to hear that there's a redress scheme where people will be able to access counselling and psychological care that they need. Because we also know from the science that recovery is absolutely possible. Just as damaging experiences impact the brain in very negative ways, so positive experiences help the brain to repair. The neuroscience matches what we know anecdotally. So we know that survivors are very susceptible to re-traumatisation, to feeling that they're re-abused, when they're put in situations that replicate the original abuse, when there's a power imbalance, when they feel that they don't have a voice, when there are secrets, when they feel they're being betrayed. And so the core principles of being with survivors and working with them are the ones listed there. They're called trauma-informed principles. And they're basic human principles. We all need to feel safe. We all need to feel safer psychologically and physically. We all need to be able to trust. We all need to feel empowered to have choices. Until I was in my mid-40s, I didn't know that I was allowed to have a choice. I didn't know what my own beliefs and thoughts were. That's what abuse did to me. And yet I was a medical practitioner, so, you know, it's there's definitely a disconnect there. And obviously to break down that power imbalance and collaborate with people. So recovery in the brain. Neural networks can be reactivated. This is all about hope. When I went to university, the story was that neurons just die. Once you're born with a certain number and they just die. It's not true. Neuroplasticity shows us that a lot of recovery is possible. And recovery occurs with communities that care. Yeah, so you can't underestimate the power of, you know, really being human, the power of positive interactions to help that repair. We all need human beings with us. It's quite ironic that when people are hospitalised, they often are quite isolated from people when they need it most. We know that, you know, the average nurse in an acute mental health unit probably spends 7 minutes with an inpatient. I mean, that's just disastrous. So the power of positive relationships, family relationships, friendship relationships, obviously therapeutic relationships and community relationships. Are we going for time? Running out, yeah. So safe relationships, critical. It's really about finding what someone needs. Where are you right now? What is it that you need? How can I help you? How can I be here for you? Not to solve things, not to make suggestions, but to be led by that person. Yep. Safety in the environment. The physicality is very, very important. The Royal Commission did this well when they built the commission. Built the rooms, that they made it welcoming, that there are armchairs there are paintings, there are carpets there. I mean, it sounds trivial, but it's not. It's about helping someone to feel comfortable. Yeah. And this is really for institutions to ask themselves, you know, how are they going? How are we doing this? Are we being open and transparent? Are our processes fair? Are they being received as fair? We may think they are, but this is not about what we think. This is about what the survivor thinks and what the survivor needs. So this is a bit about our organisation. I won't do an unapologetic organisational plug at the moment, but we're a national organisation that provides a lot of support and resources for survivors. So we've got a 1300 counselling line that's accessible. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kezelman. Very informative, and there'll be more opportunity during the panel to ask some questions. I'd just like to acknowledge and welcome the member for Caulfield, the Honourable David Southwick, who's here to share in the conversation tonight. Our next speaker is not live, but will be on the video. He's well known to many of us in the community. He's the Dean and Rosh Yeshiva of the Yeshiva.net, and he's described as one of the most successful and passionate communicators of Judaism today, and anyone who's heard him speak and will hear him speak won't cavil with that. I think most importantly, though, Rabbi Jacobson has been a leader in a rabbinic sense in terms of speaking out on behalf of victims and showing empathy and encouraging his community in the worldwide, the Chabad community and the worldwide Jewish community to perhaps rethink the way it's approached it to date. So, Rabbi Jacobson.
Vayoimru ish el achiv avol hashemim anachnu. The Torah in this week's portion of Miketz records that unforgettable, heart-wrenching moment when the Shvatim come down to Egypt to purchase food during a devastating famine. The prime minister of the land throws them into prison, accusing them of espionage. As they are in their prison cell, they turn to each other and they say, "Vayoimru ish elochiv avol hashemim anachnu." They tell each other, we are guilty, not for what he accuses us now of. We are not spies. We are guilty for something else. Alachinu, for our brother. Asher ro'inu tzaras nafshoi b'yischanenu eleinu v'lo shamanu. We saw the distress of his soul when he begged us for compassion, when he pleaded with us for mercy. But we were not attentive. We did not listen. V'lo shamanu. Referring, of course, to the story that happened years earlier when their brother Yosef came to visit them, and he approaches them and they strip him from his tunic and they throw him into a pit, and then they lift him from the pit and they sell him into slavery. Yosef apparently was begging his brothers for mercy. V'lo shamanu, we did not listen. And I wondered, why doesn't the Torah record this detail in Parshas Vayeshev when the story happens the first time? This is the first time we discover that Yosef was talking to his brothers. He was begging them to spare his life. He was begging them to have rachmanis and not to do what they were doing to him. We never knew about this. In Parshas Vayeshev, the incident is recorded with absolute silence on behalf of the victim. Yosef is taken, he's thrown into a pit, he's taken from the pit, he's sold into slavery, he's taken to Egypt. We never knew that he spoke up, that he shared his feelings, that he asked his brothers for compassion. We only find out about this detail years later, many years later, almost 2 decades later, when he's the prime minister of the country and they are older, they're coming down to Egypt for food. Perhaps, there's a profound message here. Maybe Yosef spoke without a voice. Sometimes the deepest pain, the deepest anguish, the deepest agony you cannot articulate in words. What Chassidus calls kol pnimo de lo yishtame. The deepest voice can't always be heard with the physical ear. It has to be observed with the sensitive eye. And it has to be caught with a subtle soul. Yosef's pain and agony perhaps was so deep, he didn't speak. What do the Shvatim tell each other? Aval Hashem anachnu alachinu asher ro'inu tzaras nafshei b'yischanenu eleinu. We saw it with our eyes. We saw with our eyes how he was begging with his eyes. It wasn't only his mouth, his soul, his heart, his entire existence was pleading for mercy. V'lo shamanu. But we did not listen. My dear friends, isn't this a story that captures so much of what's going on and what went on in our own times, under our watch? How many of our precious children found themselves deep in a pit, in an abyss of pain, of misery, of untold agony, as a result of their precious bodies and souls being violated? But the pain and the shame and the blame and the fear and the guilt was too deep for them to speak up. And they languished, and many of them still languish in a pit of melancholy, of despair, of fear, of shame, and of misery that so many of us don't even begin to comprehend. But they don't speak. They don't speak because they're afraid to speak. It's hard to speak. Such pain you can't easily articulate, and more importantly, perhaps they're afraid to speak because they know that v'lo shamanu. We may not listen. We may not believe. We may remain not attentive to them. I can't speak about others. I can speak about myself. For many years, many years, I did not know. I did not understand. I did not appreciate until people began approaching me. And I started to listen and hear story after story, experience after experience. So today, I turn to all of you, my dear, precious, holy colleagues, educators, teachers, spiritual leaders, counselors, parents, rabbis, rosh yeshivas, mashpiyim, rebbes, mashgichim. Our most vital, precious and greatest task today, kahayoy mazeh, is to make sure that we do not observe the tzara, the distress of our children in an abyss. And we don't listen. V'lo yishamanu, we're not attentive. We ought today to open our hearts, to open our souls, to open our minds to every single victim, to listen to the voice that they articulate with words, and even more importantly, the voice that they can't even articulate with words. Let's stop judging. Let's start listening. Let's stop having opinions about things we did not experience firsthand. Let's listen to people who have been through very difficult situations and survived and are trying to give themselves what they deserve. A life of love, a life of confidence, a life of faith, a life of wholesomeness, a life of happiness. Let's listen to them. Let's embrace them. Let's hug them. Let's believe them. And let's be here for them. Empathy, attentiveness, sensitivity. We know the truth. Many of the victims of child molestation, child abuse, consciously or unconsciously, willingly or unwillingly, inadvertently, blame Judaism. They blame the Torah. And the reason is because often those who abuse them represented for them figures of Torah, figures of Judaism, figures of faith, whether a relative, a teacher, a counselor, whatever it is, whoever it may be. Often the abuse happened within a building or an environment associated with Torah, associated with Judaism, associated with God, with Hashem. So consciously or unconsciously, they blame the Torah. What is then the role of every rabbi, of every spiritual leader, of every teacher of Torah today? Every Jew who cares about Judaism, who cares about Torah, who cares about the Jewish people, ought to demonstrate through words, and more importantly through actions, that we will be the first ones who will stand up for our children. We will be the first ones who will protect our children to the point of Mesiras Nefesh. We will be the first ones who will stand up to criminals who willingly or inadvertently don't care to snuff out the life of a child at such an impressionable and vulnerable age. Everyone who's connected to Torah today has to take upon themselves to show the world and the Jewish world and each one of our children that the first responsibility of a Torah Jew and the first responsibility of a person who represents Torah is Lo samoid al dam reyacha. Don't stand by idly in the blood of your child. I want to share something with you. Very powerful word that the Rebbe once shared at a Fabrengen Shabbos Vayechi. He said, you know, when Yosef was sold into slavery, Reuven, the one who stopped his brothers from killing him and said, let's throw him into a pit. And his intention was to retrieve him from the pit and bring him back to his father. But then Reuven left. After they threw Yosef into the pit, the Shvatim sat down to eat and he left. And by the time he came back, he was sold. And Reuven rents his garments and he cries, he says, Hayela deinenu va'ana niba, the child is gone, what will be with me? Where was he? Reuven had all of these great plans to save the boy, to save his brother. Where did he disappear to? So Rashi gives two opinions. The second opinion is Reuven was busy fasting and repenting. Because 9 years earlier, he interfered into the intimate life of his father. After Rachel died, Yaakov had his bed placed in Bilhah's tent, and Reuven went and took his bed and placed it in Leah's tent. And Yaakov was very upset. And 9 years, Reuven was doing tshuva, he was repenting, he was wearing sackcloth and fasting in order to find forgiveness for what he has done. This is how sensitive and noble a soul he was. And after they threw Yosef into the pit, they sat down to eat. He couldn't eat, he was fasting. So he went to meditate, he went to repent. He went to do his boidedus. By the time he came back, Yosef was gone. And the Lubavitcher Rebbe said, what do we learn from this? Yosef being sold into slavery is the beginning of Golus. It's the beginning of the exile of the Jewish people, because as a result of that, the whole family had to relocate to Egypt, and the first Jewish exile begins in Mitzrayim. How does exile begin? It doesn't necessarily begin with bad people doing bad things. It sometimes begins as a result of good people doing holy things while a Jewish child lay in a pit. How is it possible, the Rebbe asked, that you should focus on your own spiritual self-perfection, on your own spiritual heights, on repenting and fasting when you know Asada, Yiddish Kind was liegt in a grub, when you know that there's a Jewish child languishing in the abyss? How can you go meditate, seclude yourself, and try to kiss heaven when there's a Jewish child in a pit? That's the beginning of exile, when good, holy, spiritual, religious people, men and women of faith, we're busy doing unbelievable, beautiful, holy things. But there are children in a pit. There are youngsters in a pit. People who don't want to live. People who are hurt to their core. People who need confidence. They need our love. They need our empathy. They need our understanding. They need our support. And most importantly, they need us to ensure that this will not happen again to their brothers and their sisters in a new generation of children. The beginning of redemption is when we remember that spiritual perfection is an extraordinary goal, but never at the expense of youngsters who are enslaved to things they don't want to be enslaved to as a result of being thrown into a pit too early in life. There's another message I want to share tonight with victims. And I'm going to tell you a story. Reb Michal Ber Weissmandel was one of the great luminaries in the pre-Holocaust European Jewry. He was sent to Auschwitz. He is the man who negotiated with Eichmann to try to save Hungarian Jewry. He himself was from Slovakia. Michal Ber Weissmandel was a broken man. He was on the way to Auschwitz. He jumped out of the train. He lost his wife. His wife perished. His children perished. And he also perished mentally. I mean, he survived the war, but he was a broken man. He went to found a yeshiva and a community, where is it, in Mount Kisco in New York, in upstate New York, Mount Kisco. Michal Ber Weissmandel. He was a great man. He passed away in 1958. After the war, they tell a story after the war. He went back to the community where his father-in-law, the rabbi of Nitra, the city of Nitra, was there, and they were in shul for the next Yom Tov, for the next holiday. And before the reading of the Torah, he gets up and he says, you know, my father-in-law would always make this announcement. He would say, all children who want to stay in shul must be silent. Show respect to the prayers and to the Torah. If anybody wants to make noise, please, not in shul. Rabbi Michal Ber Weissmandel stood up, and with tears in his eyes, he said, but today, I'm going to make another announcement. I'm going to say this. If there are any children here, please make noise. Please make a ruckus. Please make a commotion. There was no response. There were no children. There were no children left. We turn today to all the victims. Make a ruckus. We want to hear your voice. Make a commotion. Don't be quiet anymore. So many of you have been holding it inside for too long. Open your hearts. Share with us what happened. Share with us what's going on. We promise you this time around we will believe you. We will take you seriously. We will not accuse you. We will not blame you. We will not put you on the defensive. We will not victimize you. We will not denigrate you. We will not scream at you. We will be here for you humbly and vulnerably. But speak. There's something else I want to share with victims. And that is, I know it's hard. Forgive us. Forgive us for the fact that due to our ignorance or other factors, we often did what we should have not done. And we often did not do what we had to do. Many of us suffered from ignorance, still do. Many of us suffered and still suffer from fear, from paralysis, from being stuck in our good old habits, from being deeply rooted in our comfort zone, from our lack of humility and depth and awareness that we have to listen and discover truths that we may be uncomfortable with. For our lack of understanding that to live means to be open to perspectives that you may be unaware of. To be open to truths that you may have been repressing and burying. Forgive us. We are ready to open a new chapter. We will turn a new page. The future will be different from the past. Speak to us and we will listen. Forgive us because we want to be here for you. But I want to give the victims another message, a third message. As human beings, as Jews, and as Hasidim, I, for one, and we, Melbourne, Australia, Jews all over the world, refuse to believe that the future is hopeless. We know very deeply, and we know that you know deeply, that inside each and every one of us and each and every one of you, there is a pach echad shel shemen shechasum b'chaysamer shel kohen gadol. There's a jug of oil sealed with the seal of the high priest that the abuser and the molester could not violate. I know that timu kol hashmanim shebehechel. Some of us know how deep abuse affects a child and a youngster. Some of us know that your oil has been violated at too young of a vulnerable and impressionable age. Your oil has been defiled. Your oil has been tarnished. That oil that had the potential of becoming a source of light and glow for the Jewish people has been substituted with years of pain and agony, sometimes unresolved to this very day. But I believe with all my heart that despite that, and beneath that, there's a pach echot shel shemen. There's one jug of oil that is wholesome, that nobody had access to. that no abuser and no molester can take away from you. Within your core, there's a sacred space of wholesomeness, of confidence, of optimism, of faith, of belief in yourself and belief in your God, of empowerment, a state of well-being and inner serenity, that no black clouds and no dark thoughts and no depressing feelings can snuff out and take away from you as a result of the fact that deep down you are a chelik Elokim imal, you're a fragment of God, and just like no molester can ultimately destroy Hashem, nobody can destroy and eclipse that jug of oil. And if you will find it, if you will have the courage and the fortitude, and I know it's not easy to find it, you guys will light up a menorah that will light not only for 8 days and not only for our generation, but just like the original menorah, it will create a glow for generations to come. If you will tune into that jug of oil, you will create a menorah for us that will illuminate the world for generations. And trust me, we need your light. We are not giving up on you. Why should we? How could we? But I ask you, don't give up on us. Although I know it's sometimes tempting. Our generation needs you. You are heroes who have been sent, I know unwillingly, to places that were very dark. But you will be the ones who will teach us and who can teach us how to find light in a very confusing and dark world. You will teach us truth. Oh, do we need that? You will teach us transparency. You will teach us honesty. You will teach us about the courage to confront uncomfortable truths. You will teach us about the ability for transformation. Don't give up on us. I want to use this opportunity to thank every single victim of child abuse, both in Melbourne and the world over, who have emerged in recent years, for me personally and for many of my friends, as sources of tremendous inspiration. You are sources of light in my life and in so many other lives. You have become our menorahs. You have become our candelabras. You who had to fight for that single unviolated jug of oil in the depth of your hearts and souls. You have become beacons of hope, light, inspiration, conviction, determination, honesty, truthfulness, compassion, and forgiveness. I thank you tonight. My dear friends, I leave you with this. Why is it that Yehuda, from all the brothers, he is the one chosen to become the father of the royal family, the father of David, of Shlomo, and ultimately the grandfather of Melech HaMashiach? Yehuda is the one who actually suggested that they take Yosef out of the pit and sell him as a slave. He is the one who foiled Reuven's plot to save Yosef. And yet he is the father of Jewish royalty, not only in his generation, but for eternity. Malchus by Klal Yisrael comes from Yehuda. Why Yehuda? 2 reasons. Reason number 1, my dear friends, is because of that unforgettable scene in Vayeshev. Yehuda had relations with Tamar. He didn't know that she was his daughter-in-law. When he finds out his daughter-in-law, who was bound in a marriage to Sheila, is pregnant, he sentenced her to death by burning. He mutses as she's being taken to the stake with twins in her womb. She sends a message to Yehuda. I am pregnant from the man who owns these items, the collateral that he gave her when they had relations. Vayaker Yehuda vayomer tzotka mimeni. Yehuda took a look at the items and he said, she's right, mimeni. I am the one who impregnated this woman. Wow. Do you know how vulnerable that must have been? Yehuda could have done what other people would have done. He could have said, Oi, before you kill her, I found a shalas atshuvas maharsham. I found a Pischei Tshuva. I found a Nigris Moshe. I found a Heter. We don't have to kill her. Everybody would be happy. She would go home. He would go home. That's not what Yehuda did. Yehuda, the son of Yaakov Avinu, the king of the tribe, stood up and said, Tzadka mimeni, I'm the one who did it. God said, a person who operates on such a level of honesty, this is the man I can trust with power. Power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely. How can you trust a Jewish king? How can you trust Mashiach? Only somebody who's ready to be so humble in the presence of truth, to be able to say, Tzadka mimeni. But there's another moment about Yehuda. The same man who 22 years earlier said, why should we leave our brother in the pit? There's no profit in that. Let's sell him. And sells him into slavery. That same man, 22 years later, when a similar situation occurs, Yosef's younger brother, Binyamin, is accused of stealing the goblet of the Egyptian viceroy. And he's taken as a slave for the prime minister of Egypt. That same man who 22 years ago said, there's no money in keeping our brother in the pit, let's just sell him as a slave. That same Yehuda stands up. And he speaks to the prime minister of Egypt, of course, not knowing it's his own brother. It's Yosef. And he says these words. He says, Eich elel avi v'hanar einenu iti. How can I go up to my father without the lad? V'nafshay kshura b'nafshay. His soul is intertwined with his soul. I cannot go back to my father and tell him Binyamin is not here. Yeshiv na avdecha tachas hanar. I will become a slave for life. Let Binyamin go free. What a story of self-transformation. A great leader is not a person who never makes mistakes. A great leader is not a person who never errs and is always impeccable and flawless. A great leader is somebody who can stand up and say, Tzadka mimeni. I did it. And a great leader is somebody who learns from their error and is capable of transformation, is capable of recreating their moral compass, is capable of recreating the direction in life. That is the father of redemption. He is the father of David. He is the Zayda of Mashiach. He is the father of royalty in Judaism. Today, let us all be Yehudas. Let me and you and us have the courage to say, Tzadka mimeni. Those of us who have done harmful things to children, don't be afraid. And those of us who were perhaps guilty with passivity and inaction, let us not be afraid to confess our mistakes. And let us take this moment to learn from Yehuda that the ultimate story of life is not about being perfect. It's about having the courage to learn from our mistakes, to transform ourselves, to recreate ourselves, to change, and to be able to say maybe 22 years later, Eich elel avi v'hanar einenu iti. How can I go back to my father? How can I face my father in prayer, in learning, or in mitzvahs? If there's one child who's still a slave, how can I go back to my father? My father's going to turn to me and going to say, Wo is the kind? Where were you for the child who was hurt and abused? Every one of our children, every one of our youngsters, every young man and woman, and not young man and woman, in the eyes of the Rebbeinu Shalom, has infinite, absolute, unequivocal, priceless value. How can I face my father when he's going to turn to me and say, Abevu is the kind, where is the child? That awareness is what gives Yehuda the gift of royalty. That awareness is an awareness of redemption. B'mheira b'yameinu. Amen. Thank you.
I think the pleasure is the fact that Manny's here, back on these premises, and we're able to engage in a discussion with him, and we're able to hear from him. I think that is a great development. So without further ado, Manny.
Thank you for that lovely introduction, Yudi. ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, rabbis, friends, thank you. Thank you first to the organisers for believing me in many ways. I know till the last minute there would have been some concerns about what am I actually going to say tonight, just as there would have been concerns on Monday when I proudly stood inside Yeshiva grounds since the public disclosure in 2011 and assisted in launching the redress scheme. So thank you, and thank you, Rabbi Glick, for those important words. When I met you a few months ago in person, I felt it was from the heart, and I certainly do hope that we're able to work together on a continuous basis, as we spoke earlier. Dr. Kezelman, regard Cathy a friend and a colleague, and thank you for all the great work that you do. And of course, as a survivor of this scourge, I guess we have an understanding a little bit more about the suffering that we all endure. I really didn't want to stand up here to speak because I think I've spoken enough. And so many of you have heard my views, my points. Rather, I wanted this an opportunity to hear your questions, your comments, and I will respond. I wanted to be open and honest. I know in the beginning they were saying, please be sensitive, please be caring, careful, please do so towards the other victims. I just ask one thing, that we do so in a civil manner. And I genuinely plead with you to ask anything that has been on your mind since 2011, July the 8th, when that story broke. And since that time, me and my family have been subjected to an immense amount of suffering. I know I come across sometimes as a strong, everything's great. You see me on TV, you see me in the media, you see me up here. Many of you, some of you, will go on and talk to each other about it, but then you move on with your life. I go to sleep with this every night, and I wake up with it every morning. Not just the abuse I suffered, not just the cover-ups that we all knew about, and also not just the ongoing intimidation that I was being subjected to, and harassment and all those things, but also the trauma of so many other victims in the Jewish community, and in some cases beyond. For example, since Monday, the announcement of the redress scheme, I had, not from the Yeshiva community, 2 further disclosures of someone and their sibling having been abused as well. Just for that alone, it's important to understand the importance of speaking out, of raising awareness, of talking about it, because each and every time we do so, we empower people we do not know even. I know some of you would be wondering why we speak about it so much. Why can't they already speak to the police about it? Each victim has got their own story, their own experience, and they therefore will need to discuss their own issues at their time when it's convenient and appropriate for them. Before I open it up, as I was saying before, some of you would have spoken to each other about this issue. It's been many years since I wanted to come to the Yeshiva Centre to be able to engage not only with the board, with the leadership, and I wanted to do so honestly with no strings attached. Some of you would be aware because I approached you personally or I approached you indirectly to encourage you to have a small event where we invite members of the Yeshiva community so that I can come and speak and share my side of the story, to explain. So in that context, I know that I don't have to explain to many of you about the concept of Lashon Hara, the evil tongue, but I'll remind you that it's not only about speaking horrible things about a person. Mind you, it doesn't even have to be horrible things. It's not only about speaking badly about a person. The concept of Lashon Hara, the evil tongue, also applies when you listen to the Lashon Hara, when you overhear it and do nothing about it. I'm not going to ask you to raise your hands or anything like that, but just reflect for a moment in particular members of the Yeshiva community, because there's a broader audience than that here. If you ever spoke badly, not just about me, not just about my family, but about other victims, if you ever listened and did nothing about that, just consider that for a moment and think of the impact that that has had on so many people. And in some cases, you may want to consider an appropriate response to that, whether it's an apology to the person, whether it's anything else. But we, as a community, whether it's the Yeshiva community, the Jewish community, are all guilty of what has happened here. I remember in the early days I was being criticised. Why are you attacking the Yeshiva community? It's really a few leaders. Leaders can't lead if there aren't any followers. And the followers are the ones that empower them. And yes, I do believe that people should have stood up a long time ago, but I'm genuinely delighted and honoured to be here today. And the fact that so many of you have come, it means a great deal, not just to me, but I know to other victims as well. So thank you. I would now like to open it up. It's always going to be difficult for the brave first one, but please, we've got one.
If you don't mind, is this one? I'd just like to read 2 short quotes and then a question that I've prepared. Okay? Thank you very much, by the way. In the Australian Jewish News on the 27th of November, 2015, Mr. Manny Wax said, quote, "I view this event as an opportunity for Rabbi Glick to publicly accept responsibility and apologize for his role in the events which led to the Royal Commission, for his failure, to protect the children who were entrusted to him, and to call on members of his family and others to end their ongoing attacks against victims," unquote. Then in The Age, on December 7th, 2015, the following statement was made by Yechiel Belfer on behalf of the Interim Committee of Yeshiva, where it was reported, quote, wasn't a statement from him, but it was reported, quote, "The Yeshiva deeply regrets its failure to protect those who are victims of sexual abuse perpetrated by people in a position of trust within the Yeshiva Centre and its schools." And I believe that this was said sincerely. My question is this: who are the people responsible in the Yeshiva Centre, past and present, some of whom are still employed in key senior leadership positions, and how and when are they going to be held accountable for this failure to protect the students from child sexual abuse?
Thank you. There is not one person, and I'd like to actually preface my words by saying that these words are my own on behalf of myself, not on behalf of any other victim. So different people may have different views on this. So these are my views. It's easy to apportion blame, but this is not the responsibility of one person. I don't want to focus on the one person of the former principal, Rabbi Glick. From my perspective, I'm ready and willing to move forward constructively. I feel that sense of closure, at least from that perspective, and I don't feel like I need anything else about the past. What I would love to say in terms of moving forward, as I told Rabbi Glick earlier, I would love to be able to actually work with him in terms of Chabad around the world and Chabad houses to make sure they have policies and procedures in place to ensure that they're aware of how to address these issues. In terms of accountability, these are being pursued through civil cases at the moment. There are multiple cases happening against the Yeshiva Centre. In terms of individuals, that is a matter that is being addressed by the Royal Commission. As most of us would know, in February this year, there was a public hearing into the Yeshiva Centre. Evidence was presented. There were even there was an interim report recently where the proposed findings were announced. I understand they may be somewhat different depending on a number of factors, but I will leave those matters to both the civil case in determining the guilt or otherwise and what compensation is appropriate. And in terms of individual accountability, it's completely in the hands of the Royal Commission. I have full faith in them. As I said a few days ago, I expect that the Yeshiva Centre will take the findings very seriously, and if anyone there needs to be consequences for people's actions or inactions, if they're still current members of staff or in the leadership, then that needs to be addressed.
Followed by a question. I think it's just very important for everybody to know, just less than 20 minutes ago, that I got a text message from somebody, a victim that was going to be here tonight, going to talk about his experience, and has said that in the last 2 days, that due to re-victimization, he doesn't feel comfortable in doing so. So it's not about taking any gloss off anything. It's just about knowing the reality and understanding that. The question, I guess, that I have is, what everybody in this room has come tonight, I guess, knowing that there's a problem. There are, as Rabbi Jacobson said, there are people right this moment who are, davening and having a shir between Mincha and Mariv, all good and well, but are here they're specifically not here. I'm not quite sure what the reason they're specifically not here is or what their justification is, because whenever it comes up, they never seem to be able to address the problem. They only are interested, seemingly, in discussing the messenger instead of the message. So my question is, as a member of the community, from somebody in a position as yourself, how do we get through to the people that to separate whether they like somebody or not, whether they like somebody's ideas, opinions, ways they go about doing things, which is all irrelevant in terms of the fact of the sensitivity and what needs to be shown to a victim and a survivor in order to create the environment which we want to create, that this is a person that actually has come forward and spoken before. So this is not somebody new. So let alone somebody we want to come forward to make that environment, how can we explain to them to separate the two issues so that they can actually educate themselves and be here and not be here because they don't like the way so-and-so goes about doing something?
Thank you. It's not at all surprising that there is still re-victimization going on. I spoke about this just a couple of days ago, that in the last month or two there were a number of cases here. However, the big difference here is, how do we as a community respond to that re-victimization? Over the last few years, since 2011, when that was happening, we saw absolutely no response from the Yeshiva community. There was silence. That would put each and every member of the community who did not say or do anything as a complicit person in that intimidation that was going on. So how do we respond to this? Now you're saying there is intimidation, and as we know, there was intimidation not long ago as well to others. We need to stand up and take a stand. We need to take a stand. We need to ensure that this is stopped and that they know that there will be consequences to this. And that means that the community needs to empower its leaders to say they have our support. I mean, in many ways, I'm happy not more people came, because there's actually no more room here, which is a great, look at the positive. There are many people here, standing room only. So that sends a strong message that you are here, and the committee of management was, I don't want to put words in their mouths, but there was a bit of uncertainty. Is this right or is it not right? Up until a few years ago, we weren't even having this conversation. We are now. These changes are going to happen, but they're not going to happen overnight. They need commitment. They need resources. And they need support of the community. So each and every person here needs to make their voices heard, whether it's through emails, whether it's through... Use all the techniques that was used in the past to attack victims to show support. Instead of the Lashon Hara that way, do it the other way. And I think that will affect that cultural change we need. As I said elsewhere, we need a generational change. It's going to take a significant amount of time. But if we are really dedicated to doing this, It's not going to be easy, and Rabbi Jacobson noted a lot of those things. It is difficult. There's been so much pain and suffering to so many of us. And I'm like, we know in the Rabbi Kramer case, there were 4 victims who went forward and went to the police, and he was convicted in relation to 4 victims. David Tsipras was convicted in relation to 9 victims. Many of us know there were many more victims from both of them. And I'm not going to talk about the many other alleged perpetrators that I'm aware of, with their many victims. So there are many, many more. You'll be sitting in this room, I'm sure there are many people here who have also been victimised, and for whatever reason have kept it to themselves or have shared it with whoever they felt comfortable. So we need to remember it's not just a Wax family issue, it's not just a Yeshiva issue, it happens in every segment of society. 1 in 5 children. These statistics are not exaggerated. They're in Australia, in the US, Department of Justice, in Israel, Hamotza L'Shlom HaYeled, which is the National Council for the Welfare of the Child. All 3 countries have exactly the same statistics. 1 in 5 children experiences some form of sexual abuse before the age of 18. 1 in 5. Every row, you look at that, there's 2 or 3 victims. That's how endemic this issue is. And that's why we need to fight it in a way that something has never been fought before, because we've never addressed it. It's a whole new phenomenon for us. And as I was saying to someone else earlier, had Yeshiva responded initially in a more positive way, the pain from the past would still have remained there. And of course the process would have been a lot easier because it wouldn't have been all the fighting and all the friction. But it also would have made it easier for so many of us from so many other perspectives that is even difficult for me to articulate. But we just need to be menschers about it. We need to address it in a proper way where victims will feel comfortable to disclose and to come and speak about this.
So, we've got time afterwards for some questions, but we do want to hear from some other victims, and we do have the Hanukkah lighting. I know that people want to do that, so Manny will have some more questions later. I commend the open dialogue and the civil way which people are going about it. Thank you. I'm not going to call them by name, but I'd like to ask up the victims who are going to speak to us briefly tonight. And the same way we've listened to others, please open your hearts and ears, and let's listen to what they have to say.
Quick, because I think we're already slightly over time. First and foremost, I just want to thank my wife for everything that she does, and in short, I would not be here tonight if not for her. At the outset, I want to say one thing, and that is that, and I say this, and I think I speak for all victims, I think it's important that you don't judge us for what happened to us. That wasn't something that we chose. It happened at a young age. It was when something was done to us without our permission, and we lost control of our bodies. I also don't want you to remember me for those things as well. What I would like for you to do, and I think I speak for all victims, is to accept us for who we are today, for the conscious choices that we make, the words that we say, the actions that we take, the parents that we are to our children, the lives that we live. The word victim is used, I'm uncomfortable about it, but we're here tonight not to talk about the past. I'm not asking for any sympathy. We're speaking because we want to work with you to change the future for the community's children. After the Holocaust, one of the things that we were very, as a community, focused on was rebuilding. And rebuilding was to be fruitful and to multiply. The children are our future. So as parents, myself and everyone else here, what we need to do is provide a safe environment for our children, to love them, to nourish them, and to treasure them, and to provide an environment that is safe and conducive for them. When we talk about policies and procedures, and when we talk about safety and well-being of children, one of the things, most important things to remember is that policies and procedures are like an ISO accreditation that you got for Target. It's a document that the document has no life unless there's a culture to bring it together. We've all heard about the bullying, the intimidation, and the inappropriate conduct that's gone on for many years. It is that conduct which I remember and which determines when I say that you may or may not like it, I still don't believe the yeshiva is a safe environment. But I'll come back to that. I just want to take you through a little journey how I'm here today and why I opened my mouth in 2011. Without going into any detail, I did so out of a tremendous sense of guilt. Someone I knew well was abused at the yeshiva, and in 2011, when I spoke to them and encouraged them to come forward, the person broke down and cried and said, "You don't understand, there will be a consequence for me." That abuse didn't occur in the 1980s or the 1990s, it occurred in the 2000s. That statement resonated with me and made me feel immensely guilty. Because I felt, had I opened my mouth in the 80s, or in the 90s, or even 2000, perhaps this individual wouldn't have been affected. So was that guilt? Nothing more than that, not a sense of justice for myself, but a guilt and a determination to set right what happened to that individual and all other individuals that led me to going to the police in early 2011. When I went to the police, not only did I make statements concerning myself, but wherever possible, I provided information about others who I knew were affected. I don't know if you know this or not, just because somebody says something happened to them, particularly in a sexual abuse matter, doesn't mean police automatically investigate or charge. You need corroborating evidence or witnesses. So wherever possible, if I knew things about an individual, I included that in a statement, and the rest is history. But the main central message I want to focus on is about what we say and what we do. When people stand in a room and they talk about myself or a Manny Wax or any other individual and talk to us about us in disparaging ways or call us a liar, they are sending verbal cues to everyone else in that room. They're sending a message to them that if you open your mouth, either of an event that happened in the past concerning you or somebody that you know, those same disparaging and hurtful comments will be made about you. They're also saying something else. So if somebody in your family is abused in the future and you too make a disclosure, you can bet your bottom dollar those same statements will be made about you. Now, one thing is important to remember, that what we know is each pedophile doesn't have one victim. It's a sickness that they have, and they often have multiple victims. So if the first victim or early victims don't speak up, the perpetrators go on to offend and offend again. So if a victim doesn't feel comfortable coming forward, today's day and age, for example, if I had a child, chas v'shalom, that was affected, and I did not feel comfortable making that disclosure, what I'm actually doing is meaning that somebody else's child will be affected. So when you make those statements, those hurtful statements, and you attack individuals, you're actually compromising your own children, potentially your grandchildren or your friends' children. That is the culture you're creating. Policies and procedures can't address that. It's up to each and every one of you. I want to tell you a few little stories just to bring that point home. A boy that I know was affected over a period of 4 years. In 2011, he went with me, or around the same time we went to the police, and he started the statement. He found it quite emotional. And then he saw some of the statements that were made about me, and he decided to withdraw. Several years later, this person was at my Shabbos table with his family, and his father, whose parents were there, and his parents don't know, still don't know to this day. And in the middle of the meal, the father starts laying on some of the things that he's heard about me in the statements without filter. Without filter. The cue he was sending to his son was that if you open your mouth, these are things you can expect, and I'm not going to defend you. That father will go to the grave without him ever knowing that his son was abused over a period of 4 years, including in the most horrific way. I recently got a phone call from a non-Jewish person that I know and hadn't spoken to in years, and he called me up, starts talking about business, and then at the end he says that he saw the documentary. And I said, you weren't supposed to know it was me, blah, 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 blah. He says, I know your voice from anywhere, I knew it was you. So I responded back to him that I have a theory and have a fundamental belief that everyone is connected to this topic, that there's 6 degrees of separation, either an individual themselves, somebody they know or love, or a family member is connected. And that I was only speaking out to encourage others to have that voice as well, and they shouldn't be embarrassed. The person responds that his wife was abused, and that when she came out with her story that no one believed her. One of the other things I just want to put forward, I don't know if people realise, some of the crimes that happened here were, I think, as horrific as you get them. Does anyone know how bad they got? Do any of you know there were cases of rape? Did you know that a knife was held to a boy's neck while he's been raped? Did you know another time a boy's mouth was covered to stop the screams? Child sexual abuse isn't a tap on the knee or a tap on the shoulder or somewhere else. It's as bad as you get. It's the violation of a child at an age of innocence when they should be able to trust an adult to look after them and nurture them. But let's bring home another point. When I grew up as a child, we were all taught stranger danger. Don't get into a car with a stranger. Don't take your lolly from a man you don't know. They used to have little badges of safe houses to run if somebody would follow you. Does everyone remember that? Were we taught about the danger within? I wasn't. In each of the cases we are dealing here within Yeshiva, they were perpetrated by frum religious men with beards, with yarmulkes. Some were already married and wearing kapotas at the time of their offending. We weren't taught that. So it's these messages I'm trying to drive home to. These are the things you need to teach your children about. Not to trust, but to be aware. And just because, and it's very important you notice, we talk about grooming, and we talk about people being vulnerable, but what we actually don't talk about is grooming has a different dynamic. Grooming isn't just finding a kid that's vulnerable, it's grooming the family of the victim and the community of the victim. We take an example of Rabbi Kramer, and I dare say Rabbi Glick would agree, that he was a large-in-the-life personality. He was flamboyant, he was very good with children, he was always available. I only have fond memories in that regard. So the first child that came forward to say that something wrong had happened would have taken enormous guts and courage. Because here he was, he had to call out a teacher that was Mr. Popular. I don't think anyone here would disagree that remembers Rabbi Kramer. So not only was the child groomed, but the victim's community was groomed. So therefore the child had to be a liar when he called it out. Look, there's quite a few things I do want to say, but I've got to wrap it up. Yudi keeps tapping me on the arm. I don't think I've said anything controversial, inappropriate. But there are a few things that I do take home over the last couple of years, and one of those is the bullying and intimidation. And we talk about policy and procedure. I just want to throw one more thing before Yudi taps me again. One of the policy and procedure things we talk about is working with children checks. And if you know anything about working with children checks, they only work if there's a report. If I use an example of Haman, an individual who perpetrated against myself and was subsequently convicted for that, in 2011, 2012, and for most of 2013, if he would have applied for the Working with Children check, he would have been granted one. So you as a parent would have been lulled into this false sense of security that this person is appropriate. What people didn't know was that he abused multiple children in the 1980s and 1990s. So until someone like me opens his mouth up, that person walks around. And politely, pedophilia is a sickness. It's not something of the norm, and until that person is treated and under supervision, they continue to be a risk. So it's very important, come back to that point, is the culture. It's what we say and what we do that determine the safety and security. Yuri hasn't tapped me yet, so I'm going to keep going. I just want to close on two things. There's a few things that stand out in my mind from this process. First and foremost is, I would say, the silence, what Manny Wax has said. Some things that really bother me and that I'll probably take to my grave with me is, one of the things was that the Royal Commission, I was the only individual to be cross-examined, the only victim. And I was told before the Royal Commission that the protocol is you don't cross-examine a victim. My lawyers went one step further and says, we'll be an Ober Chochem, we'll go last. If they don't cross-examine Manny Wax, as a Fanya Wax, if they've got an issue with, for sure they'll leave you alone. Anyway, they were wrong. I think they still got paid, but I was cross-examined both by the counsel for the Yeshiva and counsel for the Royal Rabbinical Council Victoria. One of those questions was, the guy got quite animated and it brought me close to the point of tears, but I held myself together. They gained nothing from those questions. But what the message they sent me, where I believe, I was the only of the 4 victims who gave evidence to the Royal Commission who's still part of this community. The other 3 had left. And I felt, and to a degree some of me still feels today, the reason they had such a go at me was trying to say politely, we want you to go as well. Another thing from the Royal Commission that stands out was that I learnt that there was a prayer group at the time of Haman's trial where various Rabbonim participated in it. Now, if anyone knows, both the assaults that happened to me were wholly avoidable. The both perpetrators have been reported to Rabbonim in Sydney and Melbourne prior to the assault on myself. So at the time of his trial, they formed a prayer group, the emails came out, and the Kufiyot test and all the other Pesukim was divided up, but nobody said a word about me. In those emails, there was a person said that I'm a liar, I don't tell the truth. And not one Rob wrote back and said, no, he is telling the truth, even though one of the Rabbonim on that email had already heard from the perpetrator he was moida that he had done it. No one said anything. That's another thing I won't forget. And the last thing I won't forget was that when I found out also during the Royal Commission that the Yeshiva Centre itself here in Melbourne had specific knowledge that I was a victim, who perpetrated it, when it transpired, and the status of that investigation, even though under cross-examination it came out that that information didn't come from the police, it didn't come from the court, and didn't come from a statutory body. And at that time, and for years after that disclosure, when I found out, I didn't know till afterwards it had been made, I'd come to the Yeshiva and asked for help. But not once did the person who wrote that document or the other people that had seen that document do anything. So on that note, I want to close up and wrap it up. And I say that if someone asked me today, my advice as to whether or not they should come forward, my honest answer would be that on an intellectual level, it is the right and appropriate thing to do. But when I look around this room tonight and I've cast my mind back to after Rabbi Grona passed away and the event that was held to mark his contribution to children, to the education and well-being of children, and cast my mind to the stance that I've made and some of us have made, not for ourselves, but for the safety and well-being of children. There we had an event in Melbourne Town Hall, 2,500, 3,000 people. And tonight we've got 220. So my question is, where are the other 90%? And until such time the other 90% stand up, we don't have a safe environment. Thank you.
We'll just hear from someone else, and then we'll light the menorah, and then we'll go to the panel.
Victims are not crazy. They're not attention seekers. They're normal people, married, kids, jobs. I was a victim, so I can attest to that. A couple of weeks ago, actually, my son is in grade 3, and I was going over Chumash with him in Chaya Sora, talking about Eliezer going to find Rivka for Yitzchak. And I had a flashback. I had a flashback of a play that that we did when I was in grade 3 of the whole story. And I was Besuel. And I had to do a whole act, take the poison, and that was very dramatic. My teacher was Rabbi Kramer, and he was very dynamic. And that was in grade 3. I think it was grade 6 when he was gone. It can happen anywhere. The reason why I'm talking, I guess, is specifically in my case, where it could be a first-time offender. Doesn't have to be heinous. Doesn't have to be, the things that Menachem talked about, or the things that Dr. Cathy talked about. From my experiences, I see that there's a limit to how much policy and procedures can help. The fact is, it can happen anytime, anywhere. And I was silent. I was silent in telling anyone about it. I was silent in going to the police. I was silent. In the end, I did go and I went to support my friends. And ad kan v'suloi, basically. I don't feel a need to talk about it. So why am I talking about it? And I'm just going to be reiterating really what the experts have said, but it has to come down to the individual. So as a group, it's been very impressive the way the school has dealt with it, all the new policies and procedures, but the fact is we need to send a message that we protect victims and not protect perpetrators. And the only way we can do that is by the grassroots, by the individual, understanding about what we've heard from victims and we've heard from experts, and about listening before commenting, really. So I believe everything happens for a reason, and perhaps I can lend some normalcy to the fact that it's not about tearing down the school and all the awful things other advocates have been accused of and other victims have been accused of. And I really should commend them, the people that spoke up, because that's the only reason why it's at the forefront, and it's why it's on our minds. A couple of weeks ago we had Ted Bailey come and speak to us, and he said something that I want to finish off with. He said there's no community in Victoria like the Jewish community. And I think I also spoke then a little bit, but I wanted to add one thing, and that is the fact that we're all here, and the fact that we've held this redress event and we've become so introspective is because it's true. There is no community like our community. And this is a chance, and especially Hanukkah, is that we are a beacon unto all other communities. When people see that this is what the Jewish people, this is how we respond, it also has an impact on them. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd just like to commend the incredible bravery of those who have spoken tonight. We can only imagine what bravery it's taken and what they've done over the last number of years to help make all of our children safer. I'm going to call upon Manny to light the Menorah, and once we've done that, we'll go back to further questions and the panel.
ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם שעשה ניסים לאבותינו בימים ההם בזמן הזה. Admitting my wrong. ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם שהחיינו וקיימנו והגיענו לזמן הזה.
And questions both to Manny and to Cathy. And I've got some questions that have been sent through as well.
I went to Yeshiva in the 1980s, and looking over the Royal Commission, something that was brought up that was like idiosyncratic to Yeshiva was about the Menorah doctrine, which is, Rambam, whoever adjudicates in a non-Jewish court is wicked and is as thought he has reviled, blasphemed and rebelled against the laws of Moses. Whoever hands over a Jew to the heathen has no part in the next world. It's permitted to kill an informant wherever he is. It's even permitted to kill him before he's handed over. And I was wondering how much Jewish scripture was a guilty party in this, is sort of like facilitating the cover-up.
I think if we look back, thanks John for the question, if we look back at any religion and holy scriptures of any religion, there is some difficult text in all of them. The reality is that this type of activity is not unique to the Jewish community. It's got very little, I think, to do with the Rambam. Yes, it provides justification for certain people and for certain segments of our community, but it happens in the Catholic Church, it happens in the Anglican Church, it happens in sporting clubs, it happens everywhere, not just in Australia, of course. So, yes, there is some relevance. The concept of Menorah, that's been discussed ad nauseum on various forums. There are some people, even this day and even in Australia, who still believe in that concept and do not believe that a fellow Jew, that an individual can inform on a fellow Jew to the secular authorities, and that everything should be resolved within the community, ideally through a bet din, a Jewish court. But no doubt it will continue to arise.
But what's Yeshiva going to do to comfort us that the way teachings like that are taught to the children, taught in the right way?
I might just jump in here. I have no official position at Yeshiva, and I've been asked to help moderate. We don't have anyone on the panel from Yeshiva tonight, and I noticed some of the SMS questions are specifically directed towards the current and future Yeshiva leadership. So it's kind of difficult for us to get answers to those. And perhaps it's right to schedule another event where those difficult questions are. I think tonight is sort of more about Manny's experience, survivor experience, what Dr. Cathy can tell us as an expert. Not trying to say that question ought not be answered, but I'm just not sure that anyone on this panel is qualified or appropriate to answer. Have a question back there?
I have a question regarding cultural change in the leadership of Yeshiva. I understand what's happened to victims in the past. They've gone through abuse and then they've gone through shunning, I guess. I'm from Parents and Friends of Yeshiva Melbourne, and I know what it's like when you get up and you stand up and you say what you think and you give your opinion. And I've personally experienced the shunning, the attempts at bullying, and the attempts to silence me personally and my group. So what we need is cultural change in our leadership. How are we going to get that?
Again, this is a question directed at Yeshiva leadership, and I'm not qualified to answer that. I'll more deal with the cultural change. As I said, it's going to take some time, and I think we need to focus, if we're talking about cultural change, we should probably, because this evening in particular has been set aside to discuss the issue of victims, the abuse, the cover-ups, the intimidation, and those topics. I think any discussion around the cultural change that is required in other contexts, which is often more political, probably needs to be addressed on another evening, with all due respect.
We have a question. Yep.
I also can't find words to thank all of the people who've contributed so richly. I'm just going to say two short things. I'll say them first as a member of this community since 1971, very proud, and I've been shattered by the fact of all the denigration and shame that's been brought on really one of the most amazing communities in the world. But I take responsibility as part of this community. I also say this as a professional who has been involved in counselling individuals in this community who have suffered incredibly. And the thing I want to just echo and slightly extend from what all the other people have said is that so many people have said it's up to the individual. I was shocked. There was a billboard outside Yeshiva for, I think, 3.5 weeks, advertising a tzedek forum and function, which was held on the Yavne campus. It was an amazing, amazing forum. And I mean, I left there enriched and broken, and my heart, and I couldn't forget some of the images and the things that I heard. That billboard was outside Yeshiva for, I would say, 3.5 to 4 weeks. I have to tell you, we'd be pushing it that there were 10 people from Yeshiva there. And these were parents who came every day to pick up their kids and saw it and didn't make the link. I just can't tell you how shocked I was. When this function was advertised, my husband said to me, "Why are they doing it in the Goldish Hall? It's not going to be big enough," because he and I suffer from the same naive, romantic assumption that people have heard so much, they've read so much, they've spoken so much at every Shabbos table that they would come, and they haven't come. And I think Rabbi Jacobson's point about that there is nothing holier that you can be doing than come here is very pertinent to all of us. So I end by saying that every person in this room, we all believe in Hashgacha Pratis. We believe in divine providence, that a leaf doesn't fall anywhere by accident. If you are here, then I humbly suggest that you have a responsibility to be a voice, not just to speak up when you see something that needs to be, called out, but to speak to your friends and get them to be educated. They are just not going to get it by osmosis. They don't get it, because if they got it, if they realized a fraction of the trauma that we're talking about, there is no way they wouldn't be here, because they have children and they have grandchildren. And it just like, if you would understand, not here, because I'm speaking to the people who are here, but if they would understand, they would be knocking the doors down, because they would want to be informed, they would want to empathize, and they would want to be actively involved.
Thank you.
Before I hand over to Cathy, I think that's an excellent point, but you were speaking predominantly from the perspective of the Yeshiva community. Where were they? I would like to add, and psychologists, I completely concur with that, but I'll take it a step further. Where was the broader Jewish community leadership, the Executive Council of Australian Jewry and some of the other groups, during the Royal Commission? Where were they? This is not only a Yeshiva issue. So back to your answer, we don't get it. Many in this community do not get it, not just Yeshiva. Because if they really were interested in showing the support for victims, we stand behind you, not just make this annual statement about in the lead up to the Royal Commission or the like. Stand there, take a stand, a public stand, so people will see it. And if they lead by example, then the question can be focused on this community and beyond.
I just want to say that tzedek has made the most incredibly professional approach to their provision of services. So I think Nathan was there, but there was an all-day, on that Sunday, that this function was advertised for the evening. There was all day, from 10 o'clock till 4 o'clock, for professionals. And there were a few...
Mrs. Oliver, thanks very much. I think we've got to move it on because other people
Okay, well, I just want to recommend that if SEDEC provides education, avail yourself of it.
Thank you. Well, maybe someone hasn't asked a question. Do we have... Sorry. We have a question up the front here, yep.
I wrote it down because I'm a little nervous. For starters, I want to apologise, Barabim, as an ignorant and very naive member of the Yeshiva community for ever adding my 2 cents at a table, at a chat, or whatever it was. I obviously know nothing about any of this, and I'm also guilty, as you mentioned, of listening to Lashon Hara. So I apologise to any victim in this room for that. My question... as someone who has encountered victims of abuse, I'm asking for advice, probably from the professional perspective here, on this sensitive issue. When you know someone if someone's related to you that's a victim, or a friend that is a victim, at what point do you differentiate between perpetuating survivor mentality and enabling victim-like behavior, as in people not crying victim? I'm going to get my words tongue-tied because I see you're making a face. Let me just finish. At what point does a person's behavior become unacceptable? And I'm not directing this at any victim in particular, but how can we stop the fear of attacking a victim's behavior, personal behavior, and making a victim become untouchable because they've suffered something as crazy as child sexual abuse, or any abuse for that matter? That's my question.
Yeah, thank you for your question. I think it's actually about understanding human beings, and what I was talking about is about understanding the impact of that trauma on a person's development and why they may be behaving in that way. And if you understand that what happened to them, the trauma was what's abnormal. It's not the person that's abnormal. It's not the person that's wrong or bad. What happened to them was something that should never, ever happen to any child. So yes, their behaviour may be very challenging, but it's about being with them, showing someone that you're with them unconditionally, as much as you can be, not judging, not being punitive, not responding or reacting or taking that behaviour personally, but showing them that you can actually hear the unhearable, be there as they speak, and obviously ask them what it is they need. You're not the therapist, you're there as a friend, but then, finding who's appropriate for them to progress to longer term support and counselling. But just being there and removing that judgment and understanding that this is something extremely abnormal that's happened to them, and their response is a normal response to trauma.
Just a minor addition that I think also we can differentiate between those victims of abuse who have decided to take whatever steps they need, and if they feel like they want to talk about it, that's their prerogative, of course, and differentiate that with someone like myself and others who are taking much more of a public role. And from my perspective, I think we are fair game in terms of criticisms, as long as that is done civilly. And of course, what we've seen in the last few years, it hasn't been civil. So from my perspective, I don't believe that I've gotten everything right. Of course, I've made mistakes along the way. It's a new topic, a sensitive topic. Sometimes my emotions get in the way as well. I'm human. But what's been fascinating to me is that so many within, not just the Yeshiva community, Chabad community, are willing to forgive those who were responsible for the past so easily compared to forgiving me for my relatively minor mistakes, possibly. Even big mistakes, let's say. So my point is that only through this way will we be able to ensure that victims feel safe enough to come out and talk about those issues, and ultimately also prevent into the future for our kids through this way.
We had a question back there. Yep. Do you want to come forward? Yeah, you had your hand.
Just want to, first of all, once again reiterate what everyone else is saying. I think that SEDEC has done amazing work, and the awareness that the community's got in the last 3 years has been incredible, and definitely myself, I didn't know much. However, I feel that one of the things that may be preventing our community from really understanding and coming together to support such an important concept, and particularly as a parent of young kids, and as what I look at the most important part of my mission in life right now is as a parent, and to protect my children. I feel that we really need to get the community on board. However, I feel that respectfully, I feel that the biggest obstacle to that would be the idea that instead of just trying to educate the community, and I've heard this from, I'm not involved particularly in Yeshiva on a daily basis, but other communities, Chabad house communities as well. Why are we constantly saying this rabbi said that and that rabbi said that, and then that person has their supporters, and then they suddenly, now they're against them, and the feeling that one gets is that that can create divides in the community. Perhaps, just as a suggestion, or perhaps you could tell me, do we, number one, have to shut down and ask people to resign, everybody that says something that would be slightly or even strongly not good? And more importantly, how would be, I feel that perhaps this is such an important message, it's going in the wrong direction. And maybe we should do it in a way that tell the community, we're not against you, we're together with you. We're not trying to bring down your rabbis, we're not trying to bring down everything. And your rabbis, and some of your rabbis made a mistake. They weren't educated, and some of them have admitted to it. Perhaps now the way that we're going to go about this is not going to be with taking down every rabbi that says some type of comment that is harmful and discouraging to things, which I think by then going shutting down that rabbi might actually force or make it harder for victims to come up. I think we have to just kind of go up to that rabbi privately and start educating those people and not starting to make divides. And I feel the community has a feeling that I've got from other people in the community that has created a divide, and how could we avoid that? And that's my question.
No, thank you. I think that's a very important question. The reality is that in the early stages, I tried in the most amicable of ways to approach this and to address this. 1996, I went to the police about my case. At that time, I went to Rabbi Groner. Subsequently, I followed that up a few years later again. There are several reasons why the police couldn't pursue. So that's what happened. Then, obviously, this was still eating me up, not seeing justice, seeing David Cyprus every day, walking past, whenever I'd walk past Yeshiva on Shabbat or wherever, he would just be there. 20 years after they knew the first cases. 20 years, 1984. More than 20 years later, he was still standing there doing security, after they knew of repeated cases. Now, accept ignorance, all sorts of reasons why he may have been there, but take that aside for a moment. I tried to do things amicably. I went to the media in 2011 on 8th of July after that article. Yes, I understand I would have ruffled some feathers. People wouldn't have been happy with me. I understand that. Despite that, I still continuously tried to reach out to the board of Yeshiva, to community members. And I've got former classmates who were in on it the whole time in terms of seeing what I was trying to do. And I was trying to do so in an honest and forthright manner. No preconditions, no threats of liability based on any admissions. Nothing, absolutely nothing worked. What was I supposed to do? Because this is one of the biggest criticisms I've heard over the years. Well, we agree with what you're trying to achieve, we want to understand you, you're a victim, and all sorts of stuff, but we just don't agree with your methods. What method would you have used? That is what I've asked so many people during the time, and I never got a response. Please.
I understand why it had to start that way, and I probably would have gone the same. My question is, now, we're starting at the point that somebody's mentioned that we don't have the entire community here, which is embarrassing to say. We don't have the entire community. The entire community should be at such an important event, and everybody in the community has been deeply, deeply affected by this. From now, the fact is it has created a divide. How are we going to avoid that in the future? My feeling is that the work is done, and I think nobody today is going to stand up for David Cyprus or any of the other molesters. From now on, I think everyone's on the side of the victims, not in the victims. Let me just say, not in the victims' as in nobody ever, my understanding, I haven't ever heard anybody saying things that, God forbid, somebody shouldn't go to the police or anything like that. I believe that everyone believes that they should. But we have to get the community on board, and I think by constantly pointing fingers, I think that could create a constant divide. My question is that the way that we have to continue, or do we still feel that there's pressures that we have to put these people down, and even though it might maybe that's my question.
Yep. Yeah. No, thank you. That's fair enough. I'm going to hand over to Cathy in a moment. My view on this is that there's no right or wrong way. It's really an approach that we need to take. I'm personally now based in Israel. I'm focusing much more on the global issue. It's been a mission of mine to address the issues relating to Yeshiva, obviously because of a personal experience. I almost feel like my work is done here, not because, as you suggested, that the work is almost done. I think we're far from it, as we heard from a right number of people here. Far from it. Just the fact that there aren't so many thousands here that there should be from the Yeshiva community is a great indication of it. But we have made so much progress, and there's only so much that I personally can do. And I do feel that there is a committee of management who are on the right path. It's not as if they haven't made mistakes along the way. They have, and they will, just as we all will, but they are in the right path. And I think there is a much greater understanding of this issue, and I humbly hand it over to the community itself, with hopefully several people sticking up and taking the mantle. Of course, when I'm based overseas, sometimes, I'm still so connected to this institution in a variety of ways. At the moment, it's much more in a positive way, and therefore, at times, I may raise my voice, whether from a positive perspective or a negative perspective. I agree with you that there are times that we need to tone things down, and we need to find that balance. At one stage, a few years ago only, we were there, then we went all the way there. Now we need to kind of find that middle ground. And not in every case do we need to name and shame. I can tell you just yesterday morning, I had a meeting, very constructive meeting with the Rabbinical Council of Victoria, where there were some serious issues in the past with a number of the leadership involved there. It was a very constructive meeting. We have agreed on certain matters. We may have even agreed to disagree, but ultimately we concluded the evening with an undertaking that if either side has issues with matters relating to the other side, that we will approach each other and try to resolve it internally as best we can, and if need be, then we take it further. But I accept your point, and you're right.
And I think we should also not forget about the issues of accountability and responsibility and justice. There still have to be those bottom line issues realised. And that's not necessarily about revenge or apportioning blame. That's about natural justice. And when a crime's committed, there have to be consequences.
I think maybe we have time for one or two more questions. I had one over there, and I know people have a lot that they want to speak about, but other people want to go. I think the dialogue has started, and that's, as you were saying, once we have the dialogue, we can continue it. So I had a question over there.
Have you had any experience where people who have tried to help you, who are not victims, have been victimized or bullied to keep quiet? And on the wider sphere, I take that into the election of 2014, where I stood for honesty.
I think that question's great.
And would have hoped that honesty would have prevailed. So I think honesty really needs to be a value.
I'll follow the moderator's view to support and assist. Absolutely, yes. Absolutely, yes. I can think of someone who I know who was here. I'm not going to mention his name, but this is someone who has been working tirelessly behind the scenes, providing support in more ways than that he knows and he realises, because just speaking to him, someone who has not been personally impacted by it from the perspective of being a victim, but putting himself out there. Some people, no doubt, will know who I'm referring to, but amazing. And that is the most powerful thing, when someone has got nothing to gain or to lose, but simply putting himself out there based on principles, yet he was targeted in a significant manner, in a way that his family suffered as a result of that, in a disgraceful manner. And I won't mention who the main perpetrator was. And he's still trying to get accountability for it now, to this very day, and I'm trying to assist as best I can, and hopefully that will be resolved, because it needs to be resolved.
Okay, I think we've got time for one more question.
One angle outside of the Chabad community, as a person who doesn't come into the yeshiva community very often but knows the wonderful work that yeshiva's done for so many years, and I guess I want to echo Tzippi Oliver's point earlier, there are many people on the fringes of Chabad. They've sometimes involved, they may have been at the Royal Commission like I was, they may have come to occasional Yontiv like Simchas Torah like I did this year, and in 2 or 3 examples in the last 12 months, I and other people have been asked, like literally at the Royal Commission, as we were walking through the doors or sitting down, and whose side are you on? And again, I'm not addressing this to the people in this room because they're the 10% that are here. Hopefully they wouldn't be the ones that would ask this question. But it is for somebody who's grown up in Melbourne and may not be a card-carrying member of Chabad, but can see all the incredible, amazing work that Yeshiva and the Chabad houses do in Melbourne, to be challenged on the corner of William Street and Lonsdale Street about whether I'm going to support Manny or Zapanya, or whether I'm going to be there as somebody who supports what Rabbi Groner did and sit behind. It was so challenging and so offensive. It happened a second time out with some people doing tefillin campaigns, and we got into a conversation about, oh, why don't you come to Yeshiva and learn some... Where do you sit? And it happened again on Simchas Torah not 2 months ago. Can people please think about the image of Chabad and Yeshiva that so many people are speaking about to all those in Melbourne that would like to think that this community is more mature than that, because there are plenty of people that are not involved in Yeshiva that don't want to be challenged in that way. And if we could address that to the other 90% and they could carry that on, then there would be so much good coming out of the lights of these Hanukkah candles.
I've got a question.
Suggestion was made we should both ask together.
With stealth.
Sorry, it really is a piggyback on that question. I heartily applaud and am in awe at the bravery of those who've come forward and spoken out. And I think that's an indication of where we've moved. 25 years ago, complete silence. 5 years ago, very great negativity. I'll stop. Now, this evening, a lot of noise, and I don't think anybody would call it negative noise. It was very positive. And yet, behind it, I have a very great worry. That worry is that we've heard victims move that are in the spectrum from emotionally from flight to fight. And those that are in the fight mode, and Manny, you're in the forefront. Obviously, you spoke out first, and you've moved that full spectrum. There's a great deal of anger as part of the fight, and that's appropriate. But there's a distinction which is maybe so obvious that it shouldn't have to be mentioned, but it must be mentioned, and that's the distinction between perpetrators and those responsible for the environment in which the perpetration happens. They're not the same, but that distinction has been dreadfully blurred. And I see that the anger is expressed excessively at the upholders of the environment,
is there a question?
Not at the perpetrators. And therefore, I ask, how do we ensure that some of the profile, the very high profile of the anger at the environment supporters, the environment builders, be minimised somewhat, because that is not positive.
I understand.
That is destructive.
Okay. I'll respond. Thank you for that question. I think it's fair. I think that your question is coming, with all due respect, from a certain level of ignorance around the issue of the impact on victims. And let me explain myself what I mean by that. The abuse happened. There were all sorts of things. The cover-ups happened. But the fact that so many people, those who were responsible for our safety deliberately left those people in positions of authority and power in some cases. In some cases they may not have known the past, but I'm talking, for example, about Cyprus. And the fact that these same people were trying to intimidate and cover up and everything like that, I can tell you from a personal perspective, and I can tell you also from pretty much every victim I've spoken to, that the cover-ups and the intimidation by those people involved was more offensive and more hurtful and caused a whole lot more pain than that by the perpetrator. I can tell you that with my hand on my heart. In the mikveh, in the shul, wherever they did it. They're pedophiles. They are sick people. I can somehow come to terms with that. But the fact that these senior rabbis, educators, staff, community leaders stood by when all of this was happening, and in some cases they knew about some of these cases. Of course, not all of them. But if they didn't know about it back then, they certainly did know about it after 2011 when I did disclose it publicly. Yet this is the way they continue to treat all of us, till this very day, or very recently. That is why, to us, it's almost one and the same. I, of course, agree with you. There is a distinction, clearly. And I'm not sure, I'm generally careful with my words to distinguish the two. But I don't feel the need to make such a big fuss about it, because you know what? The impact as a result of their actions and inactions was, to me, even more hurtful and offensive to so many of us.
On that note, powerful note, I'd like to once again thank everyone who has come here tonight. We talk a lot about Hanukkah and Neiros Lahair and being lamplighters and going out and increasing light in the world, and that a small amount of light dispels a whole lot of darkness. So let's focus on each and every one of us who was here, who's heard the message, who's felt the message. And I was surprised that, in fact, the questions that I was getting through were not the hard questions that I think Manny was expecting and that we were expecting, but in fact, sympathetic and empathetic, and how can we change and how can we be part of that change. So I implore each and every one of us to go out there and be a lamplighter, and applaud the bravery of those victims that have begun with great pain the cultural change that we need to continue with. I'd also just like to quickly thank the interim committee who has put on this event. They've stepped in at an incredibly difficult time, and they could have very easily have let this issue pass through their 6 months, wait till Royal Commission findings and let someone else deal with it down the track. They haven't done that. There's more work to be done, but they certainly have taken it on, and I know personally, and to their own personal pain and people attacking them at times. So I think that they should be commended for taking some hard steps as well. I wish everyone a Freilich and Hanukkah. We should go out in the light, we should celebrate, we should find that Pintaliyid, and we should support each other as a community. Thank you.